In this video, we review variables in Terraform with Azure. We're going to cover variables in Terraform with this video. If you spent any time with programming, you probably know how important variables are. For those getting started, I'll give a quick overview. If you're getting started with Terraform and Azure, check out my other videos on Terraform and Azure in the playlist. It'll be up here someplace. Before that, please like, subscribe, share with a friend, and click the bell icon for notifications of new content. Also, check out my course on Azure Virtual Desktop and the other on Hybrid Identities with Azure AD on udemy.com. The link is below. Also, consider checking out my new Join button on this channel. So what is a variable? It's something I've used so much I haven't given much thought to a definition. It's a placeholder for a value. How's that? Maybe an example will help. We deployed a resource group in the last video. One argument we had to supply was the location. Now imagine we're deploying multiple resources and we add the same location to each resource. Part of the value proposition with Terraform is that we can reuse the code once it's written. Let's say we want to reuse the code in a new region. We could update all instances of the location to the new location, but that's not efficient. Instead, we could use a variable. A variable is a name and a value pair. We can establish a location variable in the code. Then instead of supplying a literal location for the resource block, we reference the variable. When we reuse the code, we simply update the value of the location variable, and all resources that reference the variable will get the new value. Let's go to VS Code and see how this works in Terraform. Let's start where we left off in the last video. We set the provider and created a resource group for the resource. Let's make this a little bit more interesting by adding another resource, a storage block this time. Let's hop over to registry.terraform.io and then find Azure. There it is. We'll go to documentation and search for storage account. Under storage, there's Azure RM storage account. Let's click on that. Let's copy the storage account resource. We don't need the resource group. We already have that. So we'll copy this and let's paste it into our main.tf file. We'll add it right under the resource group. We have to update a couple things before we move on. The local name for the resource group is resource group. The code we pasted in is configured with the resource group named example. So let's update the two lines. There we go. Now that's referencing the name of the location of the resource group with the local name resource group. Okay, now we have two resources. Let's create our first variable called location. We'll add this between the provider and the resource block. Type var, V-A-R. If you have the Terraform extension, you can tab to complete. So that adds the variable as well as the quotes and the opening and closing curly brackets. Let's delete that and try something else. If we go VARE, that gives us an empty variable. And if we tab here, now we get a little bit more information. These are code blocks that are added to VS Code. You could simply type this all in manually if you didn't have that, but I'm going to show you how to take advantage of these code blocks. So we have variable, that's the beginning of a variable block, and we're prompted to enter a name. The name is location. We can tab until we get to the type. We've got string, number, and boolean. Click tab again. And that brings us to description. And if we click tab one more time, it automatically selects the string between the double quotes. So let's type in a new description, the location for the deployment. We'll go to the end of the line and hit enter. Now we're going to add a default value. We'll enter default equals double quote West US or any region you'd like. That's our first variable block. Next, let's go to the location in the resource group. Here we have the location specified by a string. Let's remove that string, including the double quotes. And we'll replace that with var.location. Now, the location for the deployment is a variable. The resource group uses this variable, and the storage account uses the resource group location. So by changing one variable, we can change the location for both the resource group and the storage account. We could use the variable for all of the arguments in this example. Let's create variables for the resource group name and the storage account name. We'll create a new variable block. RSG name for resource group name. And that's a string. We can give it a description. Go to the end of the line, hit enter, and we'll default it to Terraform RG. Let's add another block. This one is for the storage account name. That too is a string. For the storage account, we won't add a default value. A storage account name has to be globally unique. Adding a default value wouldn't do any good because the value can only be used once. Next, go to resource group. We'll change the name to var.rsgname. And the same with the storage account name. We'll change that to var.stgact_name. Now we have 3 variables for our project. Using variables is an important part of writing good portable code. As you saw, we start an input variable block with the word variable. Then with the name of the variable, the name is used to reference the value of the variable in the code. Next, we specify the type of value the variable should be. The options are a string, a number, or a Boolean value. This is optional, but you should use it because it offers some input validation. The number 1 is interpreted differently if it's an integer or a string, for example. Next, we can add a description for the variable and the default value. Both of those are optional. We can add validation blocks to verify the accuracy of the value provided for the variable. There's also a sensitive option. This suppresses the value from the command line output. Use this if there's any passwords or secrets applied for a variable. We can add the variables to the same file as the resource we built, but the more common approach is to keep variables in a separate Terraform file just for variables. Remember, Terraform treats all the .tf files in the directory as one file, so splitting them out benefits us to make the code more readable. Let's create a new variable file next called variable.tf. Here we are back in VS Code on the same project. Let's create a new file in the directory called variables.tf. Now we'll cut the variables we set in the main.tf and paste them into the variables.tf. If you'd like, you can add comments to a Terraform file by starting with a hash symbol. Everything from that hash symbol to the end of the line will be a comment. Be sure to save the files. Notice there's a black circle next to the file names at the top. If we hit save, those black circles go away. Be sure to save these files as we're making changes. We now have a variable file for our project. Once we have the variables, we can modify the default value and deploy with those values. If we add a default value, that's used unless something else is specified. What if we don't want to use the default value? We could update that default value in the variable file, but that's not how variable files are supposed to work. Besides, the default value is optional. What if there's none specified? We can specify variables by passing them in when we run the Terraform planet or Terraform apply command. Let's see how to specify variables at the command line. Here we are back in VS Code. Let's run a Terraform plan, and we'll change the variable when we run the command. By the way, you can go to View Terminal to show the terminal. It also shows the shortcut to display and hide the terminal. First, make sure those files are saved and type Terraform init. Next, we'll run Terraform plan with the -var argument. var equals, and here we add a double quote. We'll type in the name of the variable, storage account name or stgact name. Equals, and then we'll provide the name of the storage account. And this has to be globally unique. To make sure I don't run into any errors, I'm going to throw in some random numbers. And we'll finish with a double quote. Keep in mind that not only does a storage account have to be globally unique, it's also limited with the characters we can use. Lowercase letters, numbers, and a very limited number of special characters. Let's run this command. It'll take a few seconds to finish. Let's look at the output. If we go up to the storage account, at the very beginning of the storage account output, we have the name, and that's the name we specified when we passed in the variable through the command. That's how to specify a variable from the command line. Adding the var argument at the command line works, but it would be cumbersome for large deployments. Instead, we'll use a Terraform.tfvars file that will override the default values with updated values. Once we're done with the example coming up, we'll have 3 files. The main.tf, that has the resources we'll deploy. The variables.tf, that has the variables used for the deployment. And the Terraform.tfvars file with the settings for the variables. With this configuration, we can deploy entirely new environments by simply updating the Terraform.tfvars file. Something to note about the Terraform.tfvars file, the name has to be Terraform.tfvars. Alternatively, give it the file extension .auto.tfvars and you can give it any name you want. You can also use a combination of the 3, a Terraforms.tfvars file, an auto.tfvars file, and the command line argument. That's the order of precedence when using multiple files. Let's create a Terraform.tfvars file next. Back at VS Code, let's create a new file called Terraform.tfvars in the root module, or the working directory. We'll create new values for all of the 3 variables we set up, but I need to see those variables. VS Code has a helpful feature that allows us to see multiple files at once. Click on the 2 rectangles in the top right. We'll set the first window to variables.tf. Now we have our variables file in one pane and Terraform.tfvars in the other. Next, we can type or copy and paste the variable name without the quotes into the tfvars file. Now after each one, we'll add an equal sign and the new value. Make sure to match the value type. These are all strings, so there's quotes around them. Integers and Boolean values don't use quotes. So I'll set the location to Central US. The resource group name is Terraform stgrg. And the storage account name, we'll make sure it's globally unique. You can populate with whatever values you want. Just make sure that that storage account is lowercase letters and numbers only, and give it a name that's going to be unique. Now we can click Save. Make sure all the files are saved, and we can close Terraform.tfvars in the right pane. There it is. Open up the terminal if it's not already open, and we'll run Terraform init. And then we'll run Terraform plan. And we'll just run plan at this stage to verify that these variables have been picked up. We don't need to apply it yet. Let's verify the variables applied. Let's go up to the top where the resource group is. And the resource group name matches what we added to the Terraform.tfvars, as well as the location. If we go to the storage account name, that matches as well. That is how to create a Terraforms.tsvar file. Let's review one more type of variable before we finish. A local value, or locals. Locals are used to assign a name to an expression so it can be used multiple times in the code. Just like variables, updating a local will update any instance in the code where the local is used. So why do we have two options? Variables are used for values that change frequently during deployments. The best example for when to use a variable is storage account names. That has to be different each deployment because a storage account name has to be globally unique. Locals, on the other hand, are for redundant settings in the code. Items that may need to be changed, but not as frequently as variables. For example, maybe if we had to enter a company name in the code, we wouldn't need to change that for each deployment at that same company, but if that code was moved to a different organizations, all instances of that company's name in the code could be updated by changing the value of the local. Locals help with repeating values in a configuration file, but used too much can make the code difficult to read. Use locals sparingly, only when it makes sense to limit repeating values that may change. Let's create a local settings for our main.tf file to set tags next. Here we are back at VS Code. Tags may or may not be a good use case for locals, but it makes for a good example. Let's open up the main.tf file. We'll add the locals block underneath the provider block. Start by typing in locals. We can tab to autocomplete. Now, if we're using a single name value pair, we could enter a name and value like this. We can also group multiple related locals into one local block. So we could next add the tags. We'll go to the end and hit enter. Enter value called tags, followed by an equal sign. And here's where it changes a little bit. Now enter in another set of opening and closing squiggly brackets. Notice how the bracket pair colorizer extension is color coding the bracket so it's easy to see the matching pair. Now we'll enter two tag values for environment and owner. We'll set environment to lab and owner to your name. The tags local is now a list of values. We don't need the local name. That was just added as an example. So let's delete that. And we'll just leave tags. Now let's go down to the storage account. Tags are set for the staging environment. This is how to enter in static values for tags. We'll use the locals instead. Remove the brackets after tags and everything between them. And add local.tags. Let's add tags to the resource group as well. Under location, we'll add a new line. Add tags equal local.tags. Let's save the file and test our work. We'll run Terraform init. Make sure to always run that after making a change to the files. Then we'll run Terraform plan. Let's verify the storage account and resource group have the tags we expect. There's the resource group, and we can see the tags, environment and owner. And if we scroll down to storage account, there's tags, just as we expected. That looks good. Let's run Terraform apply and add the resource group and storage account. Enter yes if it all looks good. This will take a couple minutes to finish. I'll pause here and come back once it's done. That finished and no red. That looks good. Let's go to the portal and verify everything worked. Here we are in the portal, and we have our resource group, Terraform STGRG. Our tags have been added to the resource group as well. Let's check our storage account. There it is. We have a storage account with the name we added to the Terraforms.tfvars file. And here again, our tags are added. That looks good. Now you can keep this if you want, but if you want to get rid of it, let's go back to VS Code. And we'll run Terraform destroy. This will remove everything with the deployment. Verify you want it removed. I'll pause here and come back once it's done. That finished. Our resource group is gone now. That is how to use a variable file, a TFVars file, and locals in Terraform. I hope this helps you better understand how to use variables and locals in Terraform. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.